Hey guys, welcome back to this quick time-lapse video here on how to create the river scene by The Witcher 4. So I went inside the 5.8 and created a fresh project, added all the lighting components inside the environment light mixer and also the post process. And I made sure that I set this to unbound, pretty self-explanatory, and then clamp the light here and set this to 1:1, the min EV and the max EV. So this is just basic lighting and enabled volumetric fog. When you go inside the landscape, this is completely up to you, but I imported a height map. I just created in Gaia. So this is automatically 127 by 127 quads. And then you can also just delete those edges just to save a little bit performance and get rid of the stretching here. So I only need a small portion of this landscape. Then for the water body, you need to enable the plugin. So when you go to edit and plugins, you need the water body river, the water advanced, and you need the water buoyancy. Those three plugins you need to enable, and then you need to restart. Okay, you can see here. Then you need to go to edit and project settings, and you need to enable then after restart the water subsystem. This is pretty important also. Then you can just drag and drop the water body river, which you can see here. And this is also completely up to you. You need to find the flow, so the starting point here, and this is the end point basically. And then you can define the direction, the angle. This is completely up to you how you want to integrate this into your landscape. So I was just focusing on this lower part of my landscape here, and I wanted to get this downfall, basically this ramp facing downwards. So just elevating it more and give it also a curve. And here under the water body river, when you click on that on the right hand side, you need to adjust the edge offset, and also you need to adjust the Z offset. Otherwise it's gonna look weird. And the Z offset, you need to increase this also to integrate the river and just lower the water overall. I played with the directional light here, so when you press Ctrl L inside your scene, you can always rotate your directional light. And then I went back into the landscape mode and I used the sculpting tool just to lower those mountains, the terrain. Otherwise, if the mountains on the left and right hand side are just too high, then the trees would be way too high, and it will always lead to problems regarding directional light. Your scene might look too crowded and too dark in the end. So this is why I was making sure to lower it a little bit and form a plateau also with the flattening brush. And I added the shallow water. You can just drag and drop the shallow water. And when you scroll all the way down, you can find something underwater called the source river water bodies. You need to click on the plus and choose your river. Okay, so you need to make sure that you enable this one and choose your river. And then when you hit reset, when you scroll up and hit reset, you can basically bake your water simulation. Then after that, I went into another project. This is a 5.7 project. The reason why I started a fresh project inside 5.7 is simply because I had to gain some Quixel assets. Since 5.8 is really buggy and is going to lead to big trouble when you want to import your Quixel assets directly into your project, it's not really going to work. So you need to have a different project, an older version. And here I made sure that I enabled the procedural content generation framework. And then I restarted the 5.7 fresh project here. And I started by getting the broadleaf lady palm. So I got this one and added this to my 5.7 project I just created. And the reason why we're doing this is because we can migrate this into 5.8. Unfortunately, we have to do it like so. And then I was searching for some tree logs. I got the birch log high quality, added this to my 5.7 project. And then I got another tree log. And then I was searching for a tree stump. So I got this Nordic forest tree stump. So I made sure that I got 5 different ones. So here you can see I also got this one laying down. I got 2 types of the Nordic forest tree log here. And we also need this one for the bear. crossing the river in the end. Then I went for grass. I got the cotton grass here. Small bushes, so I got the elderberry. Added this to the 5.7 project also. And then I got those field poppy plants. So back inside the 5.7, what I wanted to do is create a PCG. So you can see inside the fab folder, we added all the assets directly. And then I went inside the Megascans and I created a blank new PCG asset. So when you open this one up, first thing you always need to get is the get a landscape data node. And from there I get the surface sampler, so we can define how many points we want to scatter. So the density basically. And I already prepared the get spline data. We don't have a spline yet, but this will be for the river later, so we can cut this one out. And you need to put this to by tag, and the actor selection tag, I call this one river. I will explain to you later why you need to set this one. The extends modifier, you set this one to multiply and increase the x and y. So we can cut the things out here. I added a difference node in front of the surface sampler, but this is pretty useless. Later I had to change the difference node. You need to put this behind the surface sampler. So you need a surface sampler for each type of plant or grass or tree log. After that you get a transform points and a spatial noise. So the transform points is pretty necessary to have random rotation and random scale, and the spatial noise, like the name already states, is giving you noise. So your distribution is not just uniform and flat, and it's gonna create different clumps of scatter. And I call this one grass for now. Behind the spatial noise, you always finish with a static mesh spawner, and inside the mesh entries on your static mesh spawner, you're gonna have a descriptor, and this is where you can load all your static meshes. So in the first entry, I was adding grass assets, and then just add more. You can click on the plus, and I added a bunch. You can see here. And then next to the grass assets, I also wanted to add the plants. So here I was just scaling up the PCG. When you see those boxes, this just means when you click on a node, for example, you click on the spatial noise node, you can press D for debug. So this is what I did. This is why you have this blue dot, or I press D on the surface sampler. And you can always toggle with D. So just to disable and enable the debug. And here you can see basically now the noise. So the surface sampler, like I told you previously, is going to distribute. You can define the distance and how many assets will be distributed or will be scattered. So please control the density always inside the surface sampler. For the transform node, after that, this is where you set the random rotation and random scale. And I forgot something. You need to also have the density filter for this one. So after the transform points, I added a density filter, but please make sure that you disconnect it first and then reconnect. Okay, this is pretty important. And as for the density filter, you're going to have a lower and the upper bound on the right hand side. So lower bound means all the black and dark values will be scattered, and for the gray, like higher gray and white values, everything from 0.5 to 1 will be scattered. Then inside the spatial noise, you need to increase the transform. So I increase the scale until I have those clusters. So what I did is I used the spatial noise and then the density filter. My bad, sorry for that. So first the spatial noise and then the density filter, and then you can see it's going to work like a charm. And as for the density filter, here you can now define if you only want to have this specific type of mesh or those mesh clusters, only on the lower bound or maybe only on the upper bound. Here I give it a different weight, because for my taste it's way too much of the white plants or the white flowers, so I was increasing the weight for just the simple grass patches and decreasing the weight for the red plants and also the white plants. Then you can just basically copy everything from the surface sampler until the static mesh spawner. You can see I was a little confused regarding the difference node here, but this is something I will explain to you later. I'm gonna fix this one later because, like I said, the difference node we need to put behind the surface sampler, and we need a difference node for each branch basically. So don't pay attention to the difference node for now. What's important is the surface sampler for now. So after you got your landscape data, you just copy everything like I said. So you get another surface sampler with the same nodes behind that, and here I made sure that I got different meshes inside the static mesh spawner. You can also see that I changed the density filter. It makes sense that you have different densities on different placements and different spots for different types of meshes, so they're not gonna overlap. You can see here I inverted the density filter, so you can use the same lower bound and upper bound just like the previous branch. Then instead you can just invert the density filter just to fill all the blank clusters. And inside the static mesh spawner I was deciding to get different types of meshes. So since this is a copy, I deleted everything, all the mesh entries here, and then I made sure that I get different types of plants. So I got those leaf assets to fill the blank noise. I'm speeding up a little more here, otherwise it's gonna take forever. And what you basically need to do is have different branches. So we have now two segments or two different branches. The first one is grass. The second one would be then the flowers, then get another one for stones, get another branch for tree logs, everything basically you want to scatter. And for the transform points, it makes sense to always have absolute rotation and your random rotation being set up. Inside the transform points, have a different spatial noise and always have different density. So lower bound, upper bound should always be different. And you need to make sure that nothing is really overlapping. So stones should not overlap with tree logs, for example. I mean, this is pretty self-explanatory, but this is where you can set this one up inside the density filter. Here you can see I got another branch, so another surface sampler with the transform points, with the spatial noise and a different density range, a density filter, and the static mesh spawner. So inside the static mesh spawner, I replaced the meshes with the elderberry bushes we got from Quixel. And this is a process you need to repeat. So later, if you want to use or if you want to add the tree logs, what I'm going to do also in this video here, please make sure that you copy the surface sampler along with the transform point, spatial noise, density filter, and replace your static meshes. Like I said before, always have a different density filter. For example, what you can do is if you have small assets like grass patches, you can use a density range from lower bound 0 until upper bound 0.4. Then maybe bigger bushes or bigger plants, maybe you have a range from 0.5 until 0.6. Stones maybe from 0.7 to 0.8, lower and upper bound, and maybe tree logs or different things, maybe from 0.8 to 1, lower and upper bound. This is just a quick and easy way to make sure that you're never really gonna overlap with things. It's not that big of a deal if you overlap with grass and plants, but it's gonna be a much bigger deal if you're gonna overlap with tree logs and stones, for example. So I tried to make this look good and play with the density of my grass. And the scale, always use different scale, like from small to medium and to really big patches maybe. And yeah, try not to make this look uniform and have just a complete flat meadow field. It should always look a little bit bumpy and natural. Here you can see I added also another branch, so another surface sampler with transform points, so on and so forth. And inside the static mesh spawner, I added all the tree logs and tree stumps. You can see that the tree stumps, so the vertical pieces here are way too much, not really ideal. So play with the weight. So maybe the tree logs lying down should have a much higher weight number inside the static mesh spawner compared to the vertical, the tree stumps, I should say. So this is what I'm doing here. And then we're almost done with the PCG setup. And once I'm done with the whole PCG graph here, I can just simply migrate all my Quixel assets along with the PCG graph inside or to my 5.8 project. And this is what I'm going to do now. Back inside Unreal Engine 5.8, I added the PCG graph on top of my landscape, just drag and drop. After migration, this is definitely possible. And then I added a material called Forest Floor, you can see here, for textures. Has also displacement, you can get this from Quixel Megascans. And I just created a material and converted the material output node to the material attributes. Edit all textures step by step. You can always use a multiply node and a power node, a desaturation node, a tint. In detail, this is way too much to explain. So if you really want to learn how to use all those tools step by step in detail, feel free to check out one of my courses on Udemy. I show you basically every single step on how to create nice looking cinematics. And then I replaced the absolute word position with the texture coordinate. This has to do with the stretching, since we are only using X and Y, and we have height information also on the landscape. So this is the reason why I'm using texture coordinate instead, to avoid stretching, especially when we use displacement later. So what I did also for this landscape material, next to the albedo, normal, roughness, and displacement, hooking this one up, you need to enable displacement also. And unfortunately, if you want to enable displacement, you can see here on the left hand side right now, you need to go inside your config and the default engine, and under renderer settings, you need those two commands. You need them and you need to restart your project. It's pretty tedious to do this. After restarting the project, having those two commands inside your .ini file, you can see now that I'm building data on my landscape. So on the right hand side, building data and enable Nanite. And now you can see I have displacement on my landscape texture. So like I said, you need to hook up your displacement inside your material. And also another tip you really should do is when you open up your displacement texture itself, so just go to your displacement texture and open this one up, you need to switch your compression settings to a grayscale. So your displacement map needs to be a grayscale map, okay? So by default it's called BC3 or BC5 compression, but you need to have the grayscale for this one, okay? Then I copied everything, so all the four textures, base color, normal, the roughness, which is inside my red channel, and also the displacement beneath. And I get a lerp node for each texture, and I just hook this one up inside the A channel and then reconnect everything, because for the lerp B we get the copy. Okay, so you get the distance blend for the alpha input, a so-called distance blend node, and all the copies you put into the lerp B input. For the distance blend node, you can see here, you can right click, promote a parameter for the blend range and the distance. And here you can now see when I open up the material instance, so we just created a material instance, and this is the one being hooked up to your landscape, pretty important. You can now play with the blend, so I have a near tiling, I have a far tiling, and like I said, I'm playing with brightness, contrast values, tint, desaturation, normal strength, all that stuff basically, just to make it look right. Then I went to the next step and got some stones or some rocks, so you can always go back to your Fab Marketplace, to the Quixel Megascans or Quixel Assets, and then get some stones or rocks. So you should get at least like 6, 7, 8 different rocks. This is pretty important. The stones are interacting with the water, which is pretty cool. I need to place them by hand, And the reason why we need to hand place those things inside the water, because we want to have this interactable, is simply because if we use Foliage or PCG spline, it's not gonna work. The reason why that is because when you go to your shallow water system, your shallow water river, when you click on that on the right hand side, you're gonna find something called contour tags. Okay, so click on your shallow water system inside your outliner on the right hand side and search for bottom contour tags. It's something like bottom contour tags or something like this. And you need to click on the plus to get a channel called none. So this is an empty channel. And once you enabled basically an empty channel called none inside the bottom contour tags inside your shallow water river system, you can now simply drag every type of mesh inside your water, and once you rebake or reset your shallow water system, they're gonna interact. So it's gonna create a collision and foam. And then I was just copying clusters of stones, so because I'm lazy, and then just reposition them. This is the only downside as far as I know. If you're using Foliage, I also tried using blueprints for that. It's not really gonna interact with my stones, unfortunately. So the shallow water is not really gonna interact once we're using Foliage or PCG. This is why I was just hand placing a couple of stones, rotating them, make them stick out a little bit and make this look natural, make this look nice. And then basically now you can see once we hit reset inside the shallow water river, what I'm doing right now, everything looks pretty nice. And they're interacting. Then I went into the Foliage mode and put all my stones from Quixel Megascans, put them inside and created Foliage. When you play with the density inside your Foliage, so you need to enable all the Foliage assets, okay? You can lower density and also the brush size and also the distance, the radius, and make this river, those edges, make this look good. So you need a lot of stones. When you look at the Witcher 4 reference, they also have tons of stones on those edges to completely hide the bank, how should I call it? Basically the edges of the river. And yeah, this is basically it for the stones and make this look quite nice. And then I was hand placing a branch, no, not really a branch, how is it called? A tree log. So I was hand placing a tree log, scaled this one up by quite a bit, and also got 2 stones, hand placing them on top of the Foliage and my PCG, and try to make it look good, because we want to have a nice tree log for our bear in the end, crossing this river, because this is the typical cinematic trailer or showcase by CD Projekt Red. They also have this in the background, and I thought to myself, hey, you need to add this one to make it complete. Just in case if you're wondering how to get the bear, I used the Animalia pack. When you search on Fab for Animalia, they have different types of animals, wolf, fox, like I said, the bear, so everything basically. And I'm using an idle animation and also just a random walk. What you can see here also, I'm using a PCG spline. So once you have the PCG, the Procedural Content Generation Framework enabled. So of course inside 5.8 you need to have this one enabled, but this is enabled by default, so you don't need to enable this one, this plugin. You have also the possibility to use the PCG. So when you click on top left, you can see on the top left the selection mode. When you click on that, you can find also the PCG, and you can basically just hand paint or hand draw a PCG path. And this is quite handy because it's always gonna align to your surface automatically. It's pretty easy. And then I'm just deleting all the unnecessary points, because I only need a couple of points, otherwise it's just gonna be too messy. So I had to delete many points, and I was just leaving out a couple of spots. So just to make this nice and smooth. And this PCG spline, or this PCG spacing tool actor, we can then use for our PCG graph. So when you see on the right hand side, I added an actor tag. So when you click on your PCG spacing tool actor, you can add an actor tag, and I call this one river. And this is the exact same name we use for our get spline data inside our PCG. So the get spline data, we set this one to all world actors by actor, and the actor tag is the river. Okay, so once you have the same name, just like inside your PCG spacing tool actor, you can then use the extends modifier and increase the X, Y, and Z values until you have this box. If you can't see this box, this white box, you need to click on your extends modifier, you can see on the left hand side, and then debug, or just press D or right click debug, and then you can see the box. And you need to have this one the same size or fitting the size of the river, makes sense. And then it's gonna cut out everything in terms of PCG. Around the river will be scattered, and everything inside the river will not be scattered with all the PCG information. And for the extends modifier, if this is not going to work, you need to always go back to the extends modifier here, and you need to set the extends modifier to multiply. This is pretty important. And then you should be good to go. So once your actor tag is the same, just like in the get spline data node inside your PCG, the same with the spline tag, everything should be fine. Here I'm adding stones or the rocks also inside my PCG. So I want to have a couple of rocks also for my PCG. And now what I told you previously, I realized that the difference node is wrong. So we need to delete the difference node and disconnect basically the difference node, because we need to have difference node after the surface sampler. This means we need several difference nodes. Otherwise it's not gonna work. And then you need to reconnect everything. After setting up the PCG and the river with the stones, everything is working fine so far. So what we need are some trees, and I used my own tree pack. These trees are Black Spruce trees, so perfect for dark horror Nordic environments. And you can find this tree pack on Fab. I'm gonna link this one down under the description, and it is for free. So feel free to check this one out. If you want to support me, feel free to also choose the official license, and then you're gonna invest like $10 or something, but this is completely up to you. It's also for free. This tree pack is pretty insane because we are using a skeletal mesh. I did not use the Procedural Vegetation Editor for this. I created my own trees inside a SpeedTree 10, and they have their own assemblies. So assemblies means they have their own needle clusters. I created inside Blender. So the whole geometry is pure geometry. No alpha cards, no alpha testing, no opacity maps, no shading issues with Unreal Engine and Lumen. This is all pure Nanite voxelization, Nanite foliage. So you need to make sure that Nanite foliage is enabled, and also before that you need to enable the Procedural Vegetation Editor in order to use those trees. But I also have a video. If you're gonna go on my channel, you can see also the video a couple of days ago where I show you those trees, and I'm also gonna have some important remarks for you inside this video where I'm talking about it. You can see here those trees, those are skeletal meshes. Like I said, they are rigged, they have a skeleton, just like the mega plants by Quixel. I believe it's Quixel, I'm not quite sure, but you know the Quixel mega plants. They are mega plants, they're using the Procedural Vegetation Editor with the bone-driven wind animation. So I'm using the same approach, I'm using the same wind transform provider, but I used a JSON file, so my own script to connect my own skeletal mesh, so my own bone hierarchy to this skeletal mesh, and converted this with a script to the transform provider. So now we can use the Procedural Vegetation Editor bone-driven wind animation. So make sure that you have this one enabled for your project. And here you can scatter basically 5,000, 6, 8, 9, 10,000 of those trees. And each tree is basically 5 million triangles. This is pretty insane. You can see we have no issues here, like no issues with lumen and shadow, no issues with the anti-aliasing here, and since this is, like I said, all pure geometry, we are good to go, and they're looking quite realistic in my opinion. One thing you have to keep in mind regarding the Procedural Vegetation Editor, since we are using the wind transform provider inside the engine folder, the movement of the foliage can look quite robotic once you have much higher wind intensity. So when you are using the global foliage editor, so this asset is being called the BP_global foliage editor, you can find this under the or inside the engine folder. And there are two types of the global foliage editor. One is for regular foliage and the other one is for the Procedural Vegetation Editor. So yes, you need to get this one, put this inside your level, just drag and drop this one inside your level, and then you can increase its wind speed, which is actually not just the speed, it's actually the intensity. So the name can be quite misleading. It is actually more the wind intensity. But like I said, you need to be careful, especially for stormy scenes. It can look quite robotic, but I'm sure there are ways to fix this one inside this blueprint. So when you go inside the engine folder and open up the blueprint, you might just want to use maybe an interpolation node, a lerp node, just to smooth things out. And there are definitely ways, but I had not really checked this one yet, to be honest. Here you can see this is basically the starting position of my cinematic I'm going to use later. And so I had this in mind. I'm going to start with the camera, with the cine camera here next to the river, and then just flying through the landscape until we hit the river banks. I just wanted to place some stones also, some meshes, and also a tree stump on the left hand side, just to populate a little more, and also just to populate a little more foliage with the foliage editor. Here you can see I'm changing the directional light. You can always click inside your scene, anywhere inside your scene, and then hit Ctrl+L, and then you can rotate your sun, your directional light. This is pretty important, so make sure that you find the right angle. The angle is basically where you can make your scene look cinematic or completely shit. What you have to illuminate and where the shadow hits, this is pretty important. You can have a really nice, good scene, really nice assets, but once the directional light is wrong and you have the wrong rotation, the wrong position, it's gonna look horrible. You need to understand how directional light and shadows are making or breaking your scene. Also later we're gonna use an HDRI backdrop. So this is a plugin you need to enable. So when you go to edit and plugins, I'm gonna show you later also during this time lapse. When you enable the HDRI backdrop, you can use, for example, any type of HDRI. I'm gonna use always the polyhaven.com. This is pretty popular. You can go to polyhaven.com and find a nice HDRI. They have overcast HDRIs. In this case, I'm gonna use here, or I will use a sunny and less cloudy, or it's not really overcast, it's quite sunny, sunshine, not really clouds visible. I'm gonna use this one instead. You can always use HDRIs from Polyhaven. And like I said, import this into Unreal Engine 5 and use the HDRI backdrop and use the HDRI inside the HDRI backdrop. But I'm gonna show you this one during the time lapse. Clicking on the shallow water river, there's a material slot. So the material slot on top called water material. You can also change the albedo and the absorption, so the overall color of the water. Then I deleted all lighting components, including post-process, and enabled HDRI backdrop. You need to restart after you enable the HDRI backdrop plugin. After restart, you can just add under lights the HDRI backdrop. And you need to increase the size. So on the right hand side, you can increase the size. I did 10,000, you can see on the right hand side. And then I imported the Quantani mid-morning HDRI I just got from polyhaven.com. Now you can see it's a complete different lighting scenario we have here. And also when you go inside the HDRI backdrop, you have a skylight. You can see on the right hand side, there's a skylight inside okay? So don't be confused, because once you use this plugin, there's always already a skylight integrated. You don't need a skylight, please. Once you click also on the skylight, you have now the option to change the source type to SLS specified cube map. And I am also using the Quantani mid-morning also for this slot. So you need to put this inside your HDRI backdrop, and then you need to click inside the skylight, and you need to switch the source type to SLS specified cube map, and also the specified cube map. You need to use the cube map slot, which is basically also the same HDRI. Now you can rotate the Z-axis for your HDRI backdrop, and this is not a directional light from Unreal Engine, this is the directional light from the texture, from the HDRI. And I want to make sure that this directional light has the same position, so the sun of the HDRI has the same position just like we have for the directional light we're gonna add later. And the good thing about the HDRI backdrop is now, when we use the SLS specified cube map inside our SLS specified cube map, when we switch this one to our own cube map, you have now the ability to increase or decrease the exposure for the sky only, so for our HDRI. And also at the same time, when you click inside the HDRI under skylight component, you can also increase the intensity, which is only going to react for our foliage and our landscape and our trees. So basically everything we have. So now we have two things separate, okay? This is pretty important to understand. Your sky intensity, your sky exposure needs to match also the shadow or the exposure of our foliage, of our landscape. Okay, this is pretty important. If you're clueless about cinematic lighting, I also have a course on Udemy which is only about lighting. So there's like 4 to 5 hours only about lighting, illuminating different lighting scenarios. So if you're interested in this, also check out my Udemy profile if you want to. Here also you can see I added the expo height fork again. So since we deleted everything before, I added another expo height fork here from scratch. Volumetric fork enabled inside the exponential height fork. And you need to play around with the fork density and the height fork fall off. Those things are really necessary to tweak all the time. I also use a light occlusion, light shaft occlusion, and the bloom for the directional light, but you need to be really careful for this. You can activate this one to get God rays, but you might just want to decrease the bloom scale and also maybe the tint, give it a slight yellowish tint. So this is all under directional light. You can just search for light shaft occlusion and bloom, and you can activate this one. Like I said, God rays are pretty cool, but you need to be careful not to have too much. Just a tiny bit is always good. And here you can see I'm trying to find my HDRI backdrop position, so I'm always rotating. And now I added the directional light, and you can see that my directional light is also matching the position of my HDRI, so the sun inside my HDRI. They both need to match, like I said previously. You should add another post-process volume and make sure that you have this also set to infinite extent unbound. So the infinite extent unbound inside your post-process volume needs to be enabled. And also make sure that your min EV and max EV is set to 1 at least. In this case, I'm setting the min and max EV to 5, which will be really dark. So the higher the value of our min and max EV inside our post-process volume exposure, is going to be really dark, so we need to compensate for the directional light. So our directional light intensity and also our HDRI backdrop intensity needs to be much higher. So I'm going to use values, for example, like 100, 150 even for the HDRI backdrop intensity, and also for the directional light intensity, something like 150, 100. Really, really bright, you can see, but it's going to look much more cinematic once we have a much higher exposure compensation inside our post-process volume. You can see I'm playing around also again with the bloom scale of my directional light, give it a tint. Also regarding color correction and tint, you can give your exponential height fork an albedo tint. I usually go for something like a dark blue for the fork, For the sun, I usually go for something like a slight yellow color. And for the post-process volume, you can also do a lot of color grading inside there. You need to find the right color grading for your style, but this is gonna be way too much to go into detail for this. So this is just a time lapse, like I said. So you can see here the HDRI backdrop. I'm using an intensity of 150 for the skylight, or 125, sorry. And for the HDRI backdrop itself, I'm gonna use something like 200 or even 150. So just to have a really bright sky. Here for the post-process volume, you can see when you go to local exposure, you have a highlight contrast and a highlight threshold. The highlight threshold is really important because your brightness, especially for sky and sun, your brightness is gonna clip. And you wanna make sure that your brightness is not too strong, so it's not gonna clip. This is where you need to enable your highlight threshold and also the shadow threshold. So when things are just too dark or too bright, you need to adjust your post-process volume and clamp it a little bit. You need to keep this in mind. But I'm gonna explain this in my lighting course also in detail. And here you can see I'm giving my expo height fork a bluish tint, and the direction light a yellow tint. Playing around with the bloom scale again, so you can see bloom scale and light shaft occlusion is enabled. And it's already looking quite interesting. So of course we're not there yet, but now you can see how big of a difference that is. Like how well everything is illuminated now, instead of just using the Unreal Engine default environment light mixer. A bloom inside the post-process is pretty important, so I'm using here the standard method and increase the bloom intensity a little bit, just to fuse all the colors together, just to get this dreamy vibe here basically. And here, this is color correction inside the post-process volume. Using the right tint, so sometimes I go for something like yellow reddish, or most of the time, especially for midtones, the gain for the midtones is pretty important. I'm usually gonna go for something a little more colder. Please make sure that you're not clipping, that you're not go overboard with the intensity here. And here, after I tweaked the lighting, you can see now how I completely changed everything. So this is all just tweaking expo height fork. Here, this looks weird because I'm reducing the scalability. So if this is going to look a little flat, it's because I'm using really low scalability here. So don't be confused. But to get this cinematic result, this is all about tweaking exponential height fork, direction light, working together with the HDRI backdrop intensities. Also the skylight inside the HDRI backdrop intensity is really important. And finding the right angle of your direction light. Your direction light, as I said, needs to match also the HDRI backdrop position of your sun inside the HDRI backdrop. And yeah, so I'm basically done so far. And this is where I added the bear. So I told you previously that I got this bear asset from the marketplace, Fab marketplace, which is being called Animalia. And then you're gonna find him. I'm using a sequencer here. For the sequencer, you're gonna need a cine camera, so you need to add a cine camera inside your level. And after that, once you add a level sequencer, you can just drag and drop your cine camera inside here. So on the bottom you can see, so once you drag and drop your bear into the scene, you can then, from your outliner on the right hand side, just drag and drop your bear into the sequencer. And once you click on animation, you can click on the plus inside your animation and choose whatever animation you just migrated. So I just migrated the idle and the walk left. So he's just walking straight and just looking or just turning. I think it's just walking and turning left a little bit, something like this. And then I just changed the transform. The transform is where you can change position during your cinematic. So when you click on the bear, it's similar to any type of animation program. You can set key points. You can see down there, can set key points, and then I just move him to the other side and try to match the animation with the transform movement here basically. And then I added a camera shake. So when you right click inside your content drawer, right click add a blueprint, you can search for camera shake. When you open up the camera shake, this blueprint, you can set this one to a Perlin noise. So your camera shake pattern is a Perlin noise. And you can increase values for the camera shake. And you can also just click on your Cinecamera actor inside your sequencer. On the bottom left, you can see the Cinecamera actor. And once you click on the plus, you can attach or add this specific shake. So under shake, make sure that you add your BP camera shake. And this means your camera is not static. So your camera will always shake a little bit, and you can define the pitch, yaw, and roll of your camera. So basically the wankiness and like rotating from left and right, rotating up and down, stuff like that. You can define the intensity of each axis and also the speed inside your camera shake base blueprint. Always go for something subtle. And then you can see I'm trying to find the right spot and the right movement for the camera here. And yeah, this is basically it. This is how I created this cinematic. And I'm coming to an end here. And after you're satisfied with this, you can just render inside your sequencer. But again, this is also not really explained in detail. Again, if you really want to learn this, how to do this in detail, I'm going to also link a course where I show you how to use the movie render queue in detail. And yeah, I hope you like this quick time lapse here, just talking over it, giving you all the tips and the workflow I use. And yeah, like I said, if you want to learn more, feel free to always subscribe for free content, and then I'm out.